I've titled this Jacob's Spiritual Journey, Part 2, but it's really about Jacob and Rachel. All right. Okay, so once again, we have it's a story, and it is just like a novel. So let's start out with reading it. And we're doing it's Genesis chapter 29. Then Jacob hastened on his journey. Now remember, last week Jacob had his dream, Jacob's ladder, and Jacob's on his way to Haran, which is where his homeland, so to speak. And so he hastened on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked and beheld a well in the field. And lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks, and a large stone was upon the well's mouth. And all the flocks were gathered there, and the shepherds rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the sheep, and then put the stone back in its place upon the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, my brethren, where do you come from? And they said, we are from Haran. And he said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, we do know him. And he said to them, is he well? And they said, he is well. And behold, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep. And Jacob said, lo, the sun is still high. It is not yet time that all the cattle should be gathered together. Water the sheep and go and feed them. And they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together. And the shepherds rolled the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. Now, this is important because you notice the tradition and the circumstances as to why they did that was because due to the scarcity of water, which there always is in the desert in that part of the world, sheep and they use cattle, but sheep and animals that needed to drink were watered only at specific times when they were all gathered together. In other words, they waited to use the well, and that was what the unwritten rule was because of the scarcity of water. Now, but notice Jacob tried to command them to water the flocks then. And why did he do that? Because Rachel and her sheep were coming then. Now, all right, so, and while he was still conversing with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob drew near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother. Notice this all has to do with the character of Jacob. And Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. And it came to pass when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And Jacob related to Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. Okay, now, going to go back to Genesis 28:2. Arise, go to Padan Aram, which Haran was part of Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take for yourself a wife from there of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. Okay, now Jacob, all right, the people told Jacob, okay, there's Rachel, Laban's daughter. Now, and we see how excited Jacob was. We see he was showing his male prowess by going and pulling the stone from the well, and watering Rachel's sheep, because otherwise she would have had to wait until everybody got together. So Jacob was smitten with Rachel when he saw her, and he became emotional and broke into tears. And it's important that, well, we'll talk about that in just a minute. All right, and then Laban acknowledged Jacob and welcomed him into his house. And so we have to remember that there was a couple reasons why he was sent home, but basically he was running from Esau, his brother, who wanted to kill him. Okay, and then he was told up there in chapter 28:2 that he needed to take a wife from the daughters of Laban. And so there we go. He gets to the well, and who is it? Rachel. And we're going to talk about whether that's coincidence or part of the plan. All right. Okay, interesting. Now some interesting stuff. And Laban said to Jacob, because you are my kinsman, should you therefore work for me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? And Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger, Rachel. And Leah had attractive eyes, but Rachel was beautiful and well favored. And Jacob loved Rachel. And he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said to him, it is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. Thus, Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days, because he was in love with her. Rachel was Jacob's. Rachel was to be Jacob's, and Jacob was truly in love with her. Now the idea of offering wages, Jacob worked for a month for free. He was a kinsman. He worked out. He helped Laban. Laban said, "Okay, if you're going to stay here, then I will pay you wages somehow." Now, but wages back then, gold and silver was very, 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 very rare. So wages were back then were usually paid in kind, like sheep, cattle, butter, or salt. Salt was very valuable, by the way. It was, and it was used as a trade, like for monetary trade. And the word salary actually originated from this use of salt as wages. Just a little side for you. And of course, Laban would work 7 years, and of course we know it's going to be 7 more years as his wife. Now, all right, here comes the fun. And Jacob said to Laban, he had worked to 7 years, okay, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. And so Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And it came to pass in the evening, he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to him. And Jacob went in unto her. And Laban gave Zilpah, his maid, to his daughter Leah for a servant. And it came to pass in the morning, behold, it was Leah and not Rachel. And Jacob said to Laban, what is this thing that you have done to me? Did not I serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? All right. Then Laban said to Jacob, it is not so done in our country to give the younger in marriage before the elder. And then he said, finish the wedding feast for this one, and then I will give you the other also for the service which you shall serve with me yet another 7 years. And Jacob did so and finished her wedding feast, and Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to wife. Okay, now this is a very interesting and controversial story. And for the most, well, okay, for the most part, people just say, Jacob got what was coming to him because Laban has now deceived him. And I mean, you know, that's the way we think, because that's kind of our culture and whatnot. However, let's look at this. Now, to go in under her, I think we all know what that means. It means to consummate the marriage. Now, back then, once he went in unto her, you were married, period. There was no, you know, that was it. You go in under her, all right, you're married. So, so how did this happen? I mean, and I read some, I like to go to Google and I read what traditionally people say, and it's like, well, you know, how did that happen? I don't understand. Well, all right, let's look at wedding feasts. Okay, wedding feasts typically will last anywhere from 3 to 7 days. And the wealthier the people, the longer the wedding feast. Now, Laban was fairly wealthy, so I would say that this was probably a 7-day wedding. All right, and number 2 is the biggest factor here. In spite of what people and our conservative Christians don't like to see this, but even in Jesus' time, there's a lot of drinking going on. Okay, even at the wedding of Cana, there was a lot of drinking going on, and so it was with this, and the bride, the bride is veiled during all of these festivities and whatnot, and so you know the groom can't really see her face. So essentially, what we're saying here is. Jacob was intoxicated, just like probably everybody else was, and Laban just took Leah in, put him beside her, and you know the rest. And And so very simply, that's how it happened. And so why did Laban do that? Well, he said because it's customary for the elder daughter to be given in marriage before the younger daughter. And that's why Laban said he did that. Now, but notice though, we can go back, but notice he said, he told Jacob to finish the wedding feast. And God only knows how many more days there was, but finish the wedding feast, and then he would give him Rachel also, but he would have to serve yet another 7 years. And Jacob did so, finished the wedding feast, and he got Rachel to wife. All right, now we have some problems. Okay. And Laban gave Bilhah, his maid, to Rachel, his daughter, to be made to her maid. Now, this was a custom for wealthy people. The father of the bride would provide a maid servant to the to the bride or whomever. Anyway, and he went in unto Rachel also, and he loved Rachel also more than Leah, and served with Laban another 7 years. Okay. Now, and when, all right, so this means, all right, he had 2 wives. Now that was not uncommon. You know that in the Bible, they had many wives. So that was really not, not uncommon, but Jacob favored Rachel. All right. And when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, and Dr. Erickle said that's not the proper word there, but she was well, we'll leave it as hated to understand it. But he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Okay, and Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has seen my affliction, now therefore my husband will love me. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has also given me this son also. So she called his name Simon. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, now this time my husband will surely love me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore she called his name Levi. All right. And she conceived again and bore a son, and she said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and then she ceased bearing. Okay, now just a couple of things with this. All right, we know that Jacob was then married to both Leah and Rachel, but he loved Rachel. So he performed his duties with Leah and Rachel, but Rachel was the favored one. Now, the other understanding about the ancient Near East and current Near East, a woman who was barren was totally was shunned, totally in disgrace, believed that she must have done something wrong or whatever. Barren was not, and I mean, it left barren women had no way to, they had no man to support themselves, because anyway, because they were barren. Okay. So when all right, it says, well, God, it says that God opened Leah's womb. because she was unloved. Well, this was a belief system back then, and that God was responsible for everything, good or bad. In other words, God did everything. So it's just a belief system that God allowed Leah to bear children because she was unloved by Jacob. But yet Rachel was barren. And you see this competition between two sisters here. Okay. And of course, Leah kept believing that because she bore Jacob's sons, that he would love her, and perhaps should have. All right. Now, a couple of things here. Let's look at these names. Now, if you know anything about the 12 tribes of Israel, you'll know that these are four names, and each one will represent a tribe. Because remember, Jacob turns, well, his name becomes Israel later on. Okay, and these names become 4 of the 12 tribes. So I just thought it was fun to put the meanings of the names here. Reuben, now of course that's what it says. The Lord has seen my affliction, but essentially it means behold a son. Okay, remember this was the first son that she had for Jacob. And then Simon or Simeon, however you want to say it, just it means to be heard. And if you go back to the verses, it's kind of that's what it sort of implies. Another meaning, and they say, is little hyena. And later on, it turns out that Simon was like really wild, like a hyena. Okay, and of course Levi means united or joined in harmony, which Leah had really hoped would happen between her and Jacob. And of course Judah means thanksgiving or praise. So that's just that's just an idea behind that. Now, but let's look at, all right. Okay, now in the Jewish faith and the Torah commentary, and basically what we have seen, that this is it's all part of God's plan. And so so we say now, when Jacob just came into town and talked to the other guys and said, what about Laban? And here comes Rachel right then and there. So I kind of say, okay, was this a coincidence, or was this part of God's plan? All right, part of Jacob's maybe his learning and part of his spiritual journey. And when we go to Laban's, when we go to the deception of Jacob, it's like, well, we see it as, okay, well, Laban, Jacob got his due, was deceived and whatnot. But if Rachel was eventually to be the mother of Benjamin, and Joseph, of course, will end up being the youngest son, the favored son. So in terms of just the deception, it's not that God controls people, because God doesn't control anybody. We have free will, but we also have that I just call it that little, like your gut feeling. We have that little, the little voice and whatnot. And so Laban, his deception and having Leah was perhaps what they say a period of time. Jacob was young, okay, and he needed to mature. He, you know, he he'd gone through getting his commission or his blessing from his father, kind of, you know, by deception, and he was young and whatnot. So perhaps the deception, Laban's deception, and him having to have Leah and whatnot was part of the God's plan that Jacob would mature. And so then we say, all right, well, Jacob could have, when Leah was placed in his bed, and he married, and he had to marry her over Rachel. Now he could have left and said, forget this, but he truly loved Rachel, and Rachel was part of the plan. And as far as Rachel's barrenness, you know, no one knows, but the beliefs of the time. Rachel was very stressed and very frustrated because she was barren and her sister was not. And so we've introduced sibling rivalry here, and that's what we will hear. The next verses we're going to hear about things that Rachel does to get a son because she's barren. So I just wanted to put this in here as part of, you know, part of God's plan. And I just, when I was reading all this week, I said, you know, there's so many in our lives. We say we have coincidences all the time, but are they, you know, are they coincidences, or are they part of the plan, our plan? You know, the Bible verse, I can't quote it, but you know, God knows our needs before we do, and he knows where we're headed, but we have free will, remember that. And so even if we, you know, veer off the path or the plan or whatnot, it's always, you know, it's always there. So I don't know, I consider coincidences, and there's so many things in life that we think, oh, that's a coincidence. Maybe not. So I think that's what we can kind of get from this.